craven, the hunter, who uses all the methods of the animals.
On December 13th.
Once you're on his list, there's only one way off.
Are you like your father?
He puts evil into the world. I get rid of people like him.
Who's next?
Witness the making of a new Marvel villain.
You think you're some kind of honor. You're a criminal, just like our father.
Aaron Taylor Johnson is Craven the Hunter. Rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parent. In theaters December 13th.
Back with another episode of The Blue Turf. This is Thad Bell from the KC Soccer Journal with me, Eric Bergrud. And where are we, sir?
We're at the world-famous Kansas City Soccer Dome. You can hear the ambient noise in the background as the players get on the field.
We timed that really well because we were here talking a little bit, and there's a couple players out there just doing exercises that are probably injured, and we're not going to tell you who those are. But all of a sudden, just as we started to record, all the players come back from the little practice field.
This is what you want, that background noise to make this sound more authentic.
Yeah, so it's like almost being here, I'm sure. All right, 2 games since we last spoke, 2 wins. What stands out to you, man?
Well, other than the fact that the Comets are by themselves in first place in MASL, I guess you could say they're by themselves because 10 teams didn't play last week, which is fine. 2 things. One is consistency on offense, 8 goals in both games, and goalkeeping. So I think they'll feel pretty happy with the results. The one definitely in St. Louis, it wasn't really close. They jumped early 5-0 lead and won that 1-8-3. The one in Kansas City, you knew it was going to be a little bit different. St. Louis was leading at halftime, and Kansas City, in a very uncommon way, came out in the third quarter and basically grabbed control of the game again and ultimately skated to a comfortable 8-4 win. Philip Ejimadu, filling in for Nicolau Neto, was strong in goal both games, was named the second star on Friday's game. I kind of got lobbied after the fact, why wasn't he one of the 3 stars for Sunday's game?
Yes.
But strong in both games, and if I remember correctly, that 15 saves on Friday, 10 saves on Sunday, a great weekend for. Oh, and one other thing, 2 assists with his feet on Sunday too. So all in all, a great weekend for number 99.
Yeah, it was. And yes, situation is normal. Comets are above St. Louis in the standings, so that's pretty much a normal standing. And you're right, Philip was spectacular on Friday night. Spectacular. He should have been the first star. He wasn't, right?
He was not. It was Leo Acosta, who also had
right.
a terrific weekend, and I could argue for Acosta there for sure. I didn't get my ballot picked up on Sunday. I had Acosta as my number 1 star. He wound up being second to Reggett. Not that my vote necessarily would have changed it, but he was terrific this weekend, and all of what we anticipated from him and more we saw on display last weekend.
Right. I want to go back to Philip for a second,
Sure.
though, because we've talked about him before about how he's a spectacular shot stopper, and he still has to learn the game a little bit, right? He was absolutely amazing on Friday night. Quick reaction saves, blocking things that he had no business getting to, pulling balls back from behind him in midair, just incredible. On Sunday, I don't think he was nearly as good, but he was still really good. So, I'm not trying to diminish what he did, but it just, he was so good on Friday.
Well, I'd say a couple different things. If you walk back and even look at the stats, Kansas City on Sunday almost doubled up St. Louis on shots. So actually, Paulo had double the saves that Philip had, and so he didn't stand out the way he did on Friday night, where St. Louis was attacking more.
Right.
This was more of a transition game, and so St. Louis on Friday threw a lot at them, and Kansas City ultimately just chose their opportunities to score. On Sunday, Kansas City threw a lot at St. Louis. The counterattack game came in, and the counterattack on 2 instances started with Ejimadu with the ball at his feet. springing a player down the field, and so we saw it on each side of the field. Reagan and Acosta each getting assisted by Phillip.
Yeah, and Phillip started because Neto has a minor knock. He could have played if they had needed him to. They could have always pulled up another keeper if they needed to, but Neto could have played. But instead of risking him, they went with Phillip, and it worked out really well. I don't know who's going to be playing this weekend, but
well, and we'll see. He's a hot goalie right now. This is a rivalry game, if not the rivalry game, and I think the host at MASL Monday on Monday even referred to this as the biggest rivalry, if not one of the biggest rivalries in the MASL. These teams, when you get on the field, genuinely don't like each other, and going into that environment, it's going to be interesting to see if Coach Stokic looks for experience versus the hot hand, and stay tuned on Saturday. Game will be once again on CBS Sports Golazo.
that's cool. Yeah, we will have to see. But going back to the two games, and you went down and talked about Acosta, and deservingly so, getting stars awards. But is he taking that next step? I mean, we saw how good he was last year as a rookie in MASL. He's played indoor before, just not at that level. And, we hoped he would take that next step. It's only 2 games, and it's, against a team that has historically been kind of up and down. But it was a lot of points, 4 goals. Just do you think he's taking that next step? He was controlling. He was running that offense.
So let's pause that conversation until next week and see what happens in Milwaukee. It is only 2 games. It's early in the season.
Yep.
I think it's fair to say that Kansas City comes prepped better than most teams in the MASL because of their off-season workouts. So everybody has report back preseason, but Kansas City has players reporting back before they officially have to report back. So I think that's why you've seen Kansas City get off to such good starts the last couple seasons. It's that mentality that we're going to come in and we're going to be ready to go and not just wait until preseason camp to get in shape. Let's see what happens after Milwaukee, because this will be in a, fair to say, hostile environment on the road. Bad taste in Milwaukee's mouth, getting knocked out by Kansas City in last year's playoffs. And if you recall that game 1 in Milwaukee last year, Kansas City won that there, and Milwaukee is typically strong on their home opener, and
Yep.
I'm sure they've had this date circled on their respective calendars for a long time.
And we know there are players up there that have Kansas City Comets in their mind often.
Well, what was funny is I spent too much time on social, and I had a little exchange with Derek Huffman, who I know was watching the game and scouting the game too, and he comes ready to play every time it's against Kansas City.
Does.
Absolutely does. And you look at that roster, not too many changes in. They brought in Robert Williamson from Harrisburg, but two players out, which is going to be interesting to see how they impact them. On the back line, Ben Raymond leaving for San Diego, experienced defender, so defender in, defender out. But the one that interests me even more is Alex Bradley, who more recently has been playing defender. He was originally more of attacking minded and scored a lot of goals against the Comets in a more attacking phase. But with those changes in the back, it's going to be interesting to see how Milwaukee adapts, just like we had to watch how Kansas City adapted with the retirement of Ray Lee and the departure of Berto Palmer to Empire. And so that Milwaukee back line, we'll see who's out there.
Yeah, and Comets are still in that figuring people out stage too. I mean, Pino came back, but Stokic told us last week that he's not fully integrated because he's still trying to get him to understand exactly everything the Comets want to do. He's experienced, really great defender, so that I don't think that's going to take real long, but he's still adapting. You have new players that haven't even stepped on the field yet. Daniel Malhu, saw him warm up the other day, but it was just, probably to get the experience, and we'll have to see how he shows up. A couple other players that are rookies, and Coach even said something about, wait till you see my young guys that haven't even seen the field yet.
Right, and Lucia Tetsane moving back from midfielder where he was supposed to be. So basically to Ray Lee's spot in the back line on the standard rotation, and the bangers that he scored in both games were featured on Morning Footy on CBS Sports Golazo. That was what we expected all the time from Ray Lee, that lethal left foot from the back line, and we saw it definitely on display for Lucia Tetsane. It's the discipline of remembering, oh, I'm a defender too, as he's moving into the offense trying to score.
A player we did see on Sunday was Nathan Dirtle. Young guy who, rookie, but they've spoke very highly of him. What did you see the time he was out there?
I thought he looked good. He was situationally put in roles. They had to make some adjustments from the Friday night roster. A few players got dinged. We saw Lucas Souza take Sunday off for sure, and Junior Kazim made his season debut in a long time, in a non-traditional position for him. And so, in a way, he was like the fourth forward. You have Reggett and Marquez attacking, Christian Andreas as the defensive runner, and then Junior was playing in a couple different in places, including in the midfield too. And so you had Nathan pop in too in a couple different positions, and I think that Coach Stokic showed a little bit of flexibility on his roster. And as you said, not everybody has gotten their call up yet, and so we'll see what he's holding back to this point.
Part of it was Nacho, who had to miss the first game due to suspension, but he was back for the second game. Played a pretty solid game, but I would say the restarts was not the best. I think he actually worked better under Linus the first game. But, again, Nacho has we know he can do that, so it's not too much of a worry, and that there's other options if he still struggles with that. But the regular play, I think he was doing really well.
Yeah, and I mean, it's early. It's really early to make some conclusions about the season based on two games, both against your rival, one at home. Get a few more games on the road, get more opportunities on the power play, et cetera, and then I think you can start seeing what this team looks like. But you couldn't have expected a better start. I guess you could have said, hey, we should have aimed for shutouts both games. That's not terribly realistic. No. But for the pundits who said that both teams should be getting one win, I think if you're St. Louis, that would have been probably a great weekend. For Kansas City, that would have been a setback. And so this is what Kansas City expected. This is what Kansas City delivered.
And I know a lot of people are going to be looking at St. Louis as they should have been much better, because you have the Tayus, the SKs, they've both come to they've all are now in the city of brotherly defeat. But that's why they expect them, because, I mean, we know what Tayu, especially Frank, can do for scoring, and he was held scoreless on the first night, and then the second night he got 2 goals?
Yeah, he got 2 goals. Both were on deflections. They still all count, and I gave him credit on air. I mean, sometimes you just have to know to be in the right place, and then good things happen. What I'll say about St. Louis is I don't have a really good idea of what their character is.
No.
And with some teams, you know what to expect. With Kansas City, you know they want to play the transition game. You know they're going to be physical on defense. You know what to expect with Milwaukee. You know what to expect with Baltimore, etc. I just don't have a read yet on St. Louis, and until they define that for themselves, I think the jury is still out in terms of where they could end the season, positively, negatively, or neutral.
It's again, I poke fun at them a little bit because I want to. They have improved roster-wise. We know they should be better over the season. It takes a while for those things to gel and come together. It's still the same coach, so we don't know if that's coming into play there. But I was a little disappointed that there was only like 2,500 fans out there, whatever the exact number was.
Yeah, I think it's a time of adaptation for that franchise. For the longest time, they were by themselves, and with MLS coming into St. Louis, it's crowded the scene there. And so how do they redefine themselves in not necessarily in the shadow of St. Louis City, but as their own legitimate soccer brand. And I think that's something that they're going to have to work out. If you look at Kansas City, this soccer market's even more crowded because you have MLS with Sporting, you have NWSL with the Current. So theoretically, there's even more competition in Kansas City, and yet Kansas City has found its lane. 5,100 people plus at that first game, and so I know it's early yet, but the Comets continue to lead this league in attendance.
Yeah, it's a lot of credit to Kansas City. They're not going to be close to sold out every single game. You have a lot of games close together, and it's holidays and all that stuff, so they're not going to. I know the next two games will probably be less than what they had in the home opener, but it was a home opener for both teams. So I was a little disappointed that St. Charles didn't turn out a little bit better for that. But hopefully they figure that out, because it does strengthen the league to have strong franchises everywhere.
What I think as a player, you would prefer to go somewhere and have a full crowd to play against. It raises the intensity or raises the level of the game. And sure, it's nice to say, oh, yeah, once again, we're leading the league in attendance. But I think ultimately it helps everybody if everybody's battling for the top attendance.
It does. Let's see, anything else stand out from those first two games? I know it's early and you don't want to put too much into it, but that's what we come here to talk about. So
yeah, well, I'd say a couple things. One is, let's see how Philip Ejimatu's performance affects coaching strategy down the road. We saw glimpses of him last year, but not a consistent rotation of goalkeepers. We'll see if that changes this year.
Right.
TBD. You and I talked with Coach Stokic following the game in St. Louis in his post-game press conference, and I asked the question, which you addressed in your blog post. Do you change strategy depending on who is in goal? And he says, absolutely not. We have expectations for them both. And I think you saw on Sunday, very much so, Ejimatu started the counterattack.
Yep.
And so that is a tremendous asset, having a goalkeeper who's not only going to make a ton of saves, but potentially lead you to goals on the counter.
And credit to Philip, because I always thought of him as stronger with throwing. He came into a couple games last year, I believe, just to restart the game, to throw the ball, get it downfield for a chance to score. But he did both of those with his feet, right?
Yeah, if there was only one concern I had, and it's one of those early in the season, and this is an issue where the bench and the goalkeeper need to be in communication. He took a infraction for the second touch on the same possession, and so that's something that they'll have to work out too, in terms of, is this something that the goalkeeper is tracking? Is it the bench coach tracking? Or how do you make sure that you don't give St. Louis or any other opposition an easy free start opportunity in your area? In that case, it was outside the yellow line, so no harm, no foul. But if this were to happen later in the season, closer to the box, you don't want to give up a goal on something that could have been so preventable.
Absolutely. All right, so we already talked a little bit about Milwaukee. Who should we be worried about for scoring-wise? I mean, I know Huffman.
Sure. I mean, IB26 is their player who impressed me in his first year from Milwaukee last year was Ricardo Carvalho. Had one of the highlight goals of the year for sure. I think he found his way into that system pretty fluidly last year. Alex Sanchez has always impressed me, and I think that he's another player where I would look at how many goals is he going to score this year, because he definitely has the talent, and somebody who's gotten a lot of time over this summer, Super Mario Alvarez, in terms of being a playmaker too. I think what's good about that team is they can score in a lot of different ways. I didn't even mention Sean Escueta. They have players who can beat you at all three lines there.
Well, I'm watching a little bit of practice while you're talking. One player we forgot to mention was Marcel Berry, returning back home, got a goal.
Oh, yeah. Well, he had a goal there. he looked solid in Kansas City. I think Coach Stokic is still trying to figure out how do we get the most of him. His first step is lethal, and I think what I suspect Coach Stokic is telling him is show some aggressiveness when you have the ball. Don't just wait for the opportunity, make the opportunity, because there are a few players in the league who can keep up with him step for step. And so I don't think we've even seen his ceiling yet.
No, I don't either, and I hope to talk to him after either this pod or maybe the next one, just to talk about his experience coming here versus, and then playing against his former team. But we'll see, and do stay tuned. Hopefully, we'll have somebody after this, regardless. But it's all right. So, anything else we should talk about the Comets or Milwaukee, or should we go to like a little league?
Well, let's
info?
talk about a little league. Other than just a pivot, the league debuted its 40-game package on CBS Sports Golazo on Sunday. We had the call. Yep. Great to have Lux on board with Nick and me. Game 2 in the package is this Saturday in Milwaukee, and so this is something to look forward to if you're a Comets fan. It feels like you're on a national broadcast when you're watching games there. And then now that MASL Monday has moved there, it feels like you're watching a national show. So kudos to the league for making that move. But there's all sorts of league news we can talk about, playoffs, etc.
Well, and Keith Tozier came on the show and talked about the playoffs and perhaps a little more info about why the playoffs will be primarily in San Diego. And I know that you and I have discussed some of this type of stuff before, and I can't remember how much of it was on air versus some of the stuff that was off air, but what was the reasoning that was given for San Diego, besides it's the first specific stadium for an indoor team?
Yeah, no, I think what San Diego has going for it is they have a weekend of dates that they can block off, which is prime time. The league hadn't announced it, but the commissioner talked about this being teed up for CBS Sports Golazo. Yeah. So if he leaked something ahead of time, that was your little tidbit for tuning in on Monday night.
I will say I expected that though with the 40-game package and then the playoffs. I mean, it's set up for that, so it's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I spent maybe too much time on social after the announcement. Weighed in a little bit. There were fans who were pretty irate about this across the league, but if you look at this from a financial perspective, it makes all the sense in the world. Most MASL teams are not the primary tenant in their arenas, so even if they make the playoffs, let's pivot back to last year. Every round was a best-of-3 series, so you knew you were going to have one game at home, you knew you were going to have to travel on the road, and you didn't have that much time to book your travel. Right. So you were paying higher rates for your players to go on the road because there was unpredictability. And on top of that, look at playoff attendance for many of the other teams. Kansas City did fine in the playoffs last year, but many other teams struggled because of the dates that were available.
Yep.
I flew up to Utica to call that Kansas City Utica first round game on a Monday night, and it wasn't as full as you would expect it to be. And so I think this is intended to do a couple different things, Thad. For teams who know they're going to make it there, I wouldn't assume if I were Kansas City, let's book our airfare right now, although I'm sure some fans are thinking of that. But
yes.
You can pretty much know, here's when we're going to go to Kansas City, and you can lock in your rates. What the commissioner noted, too, was there's a revenue sharing framework in place, hotel accommodations in place, and so that's going to minimize some of the expenses that teams like Kansas City had to bear last year going all the way through to Chihuahua. There's still the opportunity for the two teams that advance out of that weekend to host final games. Yes. So it's not like what the league has said is we're taking the playoffs away from you. And to be clear, for the comments that were made online, not all 12 teams are going to make the playoffs. So there's going to be 4 teams that were sitting home regardless.
Yep.
So you draw it back to the 8 who are going to qualify. I think the owners saw the financial advantages in this, plus the exposure the league's going to get by airing games on CBS Sports Golazo, allegedly, and determined that this was in the collective best interest, even if individual teams might have found a different lane that worked better for them. Collectively,
Right,
this
for the
was better
league.
for the league.
Yeah, and again, I will always argue that I prefer finals to be at the home of the team that earned it. So like NWSL, even though it was here in Kansas City, I didn't want it to be there because of just being granted it. The Super Bowl is there because they make such a big event out of it that it's just it's the pre-picked site and whatever money they get paid out of that. But for MASL, you have to understand this league, okay? It is not the highest profit earning league. I mean, I'm sure most teams actually lose a certain amount of money, if not a lot, to go to a place that they can already have hotels scheduled ahead of time. So they can say, hey, we need X number of rooms, times however many, and have that planned. You can have flights already bought a long time ahead of time, because everybody, there will be a point where you will know probably 6 of the 8 teams going there. So they will be able to do that and schedule it much earlier. All these factors come into it. And again, I understand why. I would rather it be here. I'd rather the Comets be playing here. However, I understand exactly why they're doing it, and I'm okay with it. I may not love it, but it makes absolute sense. The hotels, the revenue sharing. So teams that go there to play will still make money out of that, just maybe not as much as they would have at home.
Or at least not lose as much money.
Right.
Well, and the exposure too. And so, I mean, it's difficult having this conversation. Soccer is such a passionate sport, and MASL fans have deep, deep, deep attachments to their teams. And we've had this conversation before in the not so distant past regarding the aftermath of the Zach Rega trade in terms of how some Comets fans felt. We saw this last year in terms of some of the player movements and how some Comets fans felt. So this is totally predictable. I think the issue is, do you want this league to gain bigger exposure? Do you want this league to be sustainable so that way 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you're not wondering how many teams are going to be playing this next season? If the end is that, to me, this looks like a step that will take the league in that direction.
Yeah, and you can't really predict any of that. I mean, I remember back when one of the leagues joined USL, and then it didn't really work out to be the benefit they thought it would be. This may not be the benefit that we think it can be. But at the same time, it is something that logically looks like it will be a benefit to the teams, the league, the future, getting it on Golazo, all these things that, like getting it in front of other people who may just tune into it and then they start going, hey, why don't we have that team? And some of the other growth that the MASL has been doing. Again, I don't want to sit here and sound like I'm a MASL apologist or, I don't think everything they do is right. There's certain rules I would change, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, I'm not so tied to all that stuff. But, there's MASL, MASL2, MASL3, MASLW. I was just looking up, trying to find more info on all the women's teams just because I was curious.
Road trip to Wichita, Thad. You can get your share.
Why is there not an MASLW team here? Of course.
You could work on that if you'd like.
Well, I might try to work on a USL1 team since Kansas City just got 2 USL2 teams.
That's right.
Over the last week.
Well, and if fans really want the major and major arena soccer league to mean something,
right?
I can't tell you. No, let me do this. Say this a different way. That if I had $1 for every primarily Facebook post over the last 5 years of MASL fans saying, why aren't we on ESPN? Why don't we get more coverage?
Yes.
If I had $1 every time, I could bring an MASLW franchise to Kansas City or an MASL franchise to whatever city everybody wants to get a new franchise there. My point being that the league is taking steps in a smart business environment for what makes sense in the year 2024 heading into 2025. That should be celebrated, even if it's not convenient for everybody involved. And I'll raise my hand as somebody who had the privilege of calling games in every series last year. Do I miss the prospect of having that opportunity in 25? Absolutely, but it's in the greater good of the league to go down this road.
And again, Golazo is a big benefit for the league. 40 games on there. More professionalism from the broadcasts that people will see. All of that affects everything. So all of this is goodness. It just may not be what you preferred. So if you're selfish and you say, "Oh, I want all these games at home" or whatever, then you're not interested in the league. You're only interested in your one little franchise doing something, which your one little franchise may or may not have a team to play against if the league doesn't continue to grow.
Well, the other thing I think you can bring this perspective because you spend a lot of time within Major League Soccer and talking about Major League Soccer. It's not like the playoff system in MLS has been consistent every year,
Oh, hell no.
right? And there are now rounds where you're not going to get to play at home. Where in the past you used to be guaranteed a home game in every round. That has changed too. So and you mentioned NWSL. NWSL traditionally the championship played by the team with the better regular season record. Still in the tournament, right?
No, actually, a lot of them have been.
Oh yeah, they've done it both ways.
Yes.
Yeah, so they've done it both ways, but it hasn't been consistent through that league's history too.
I can't think of a league that has, over the last 20 years, has not changed their playoff format in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's just extending it, or the amount of games you play, or I think probably NHL is the only one that
NBA has for sure. NFL has added teams in. NFL has taken buys away. I mean, there's been a lot that's going on, and everybody's looking for the system that makes sense. And what's driving a lot of that is revenue, but also broadcast.
Yes.
And what I mean by broadcast stream, because you could argue with MLS, that's Apple TV. That's not on linear channel access. This is something else. But the era we're in, how do we maximize exposure of our league? And hopefully what this will do is drive more fans in the seats in arenas across the league too. And so it's a complicated jigsaw puzzle that the league is trying to put together, which includes attendance, it includes sponsorships, it includes broadcast. It's a lot.
You know what would really drive some craziness is if the old NFL, and I mean, they might even still do this, I just don't pay that much attention, but if it's not a sellout, you can't broadcast it.
Oh, I remember growing up in that era where you would miss, and I grew up in LA, so there were so many games where the Rams and the Raiders were blacked out because nobody's filling the Coliseum. Back in that era, nobody's filling the Coliseum, so you're never getting to see those games. Yeah,
so just imagine if that happened in MASL. The only team I would get to be on a lot of times is Comets.
Well,
Milwaukee.
I mean, it's a different time we're in. I think the expectations have changed. The expectation is that every game is accessible, and to the league's credit, look at what they've done this offseason. YouTube is there, and in fact, I guess Twitch was on Friday night too, but YouTube was there. A lot of fans wanted it back. So there's a safety net for the games that aren't on Golazo. One of the challenges with Golazo is it's a U.S.-only access, and so then they added international access. So no matter where you are throughout the world, you can watch an MASL game.
Yeah.
I'm old enough to remember when you were lucky if you could get a radio signal to listen to indoor soccer. And so we're in a different era, different expectations. But if you want to grow this game and grow it inside and outside, and I'll call it North America too, right? Because you have the two-time defending champions in Chihuahua. You need to come up with different strategies to allow fans, your hardcore fans and the new fans you want to become hardcore, to access those games.
Talk about being old enough to something. I remember MLS games being the way fans were getting information was going to the big soccer forum and somebody at that site getting on and like saying, okay, the score is this at this time. Like, because there was no tweets, there was no streams, there was no anything. The teams weren't putting stuff out. The way I backed into doing some of the stuff that I do now is I posted a photo on Big Soccer Forum and people went, "You got a photo from training?" it's just how much this has grown over the last decade and a half, 2 decades. It's incredible. So look at that growth, and not every step is going to be right. Obviously, not every step is going to be right, but this is progress.
It's absolute progress, and in a relative short period of time, because I came in, it's been now, this is year 6, so this was 5 years ago when I started, and to look at what the league has access to now, it was really glitchy in the years before I came on air, and we've elevated from doing YouTube to doing Facebook during the pandemic, to the move to Twitch, to CBS Sports Golazo, and then to provide Spanish language broadcasts. And so if you were to ask Comets fans, MASL fans, to go back in the time machine, say 10 years ago, and if you were to go back there at that and say, what if I were to tell you that in the year 2024, you would have access to all this? There would be a lot of doubters there saying, the problem is people's expectations get built up incrementally. And so where we are now, it's not good enough, right? I mean, there could be something better. And I think the league keeps striving towards something better. But if you were to be a little objective, some pretty significant strides that have been made.
It is. I mean, and you're comparing this to things like MLS on Apple and NWSL on Ion, Prime, CBS, whatever else.
ABC too.
Yeah, they're on several channels, but the regular games are on like 4 regular channels.
They were on YouTube a couple years ago.
I know.
Yeah, or Twitch too, right?
Maybe I don't remember them being on Twitch, but maybe they were. It's just there's a lot of growth. This is those rising tide lifts all boats, all ships, however that exact definition that quote is. But MASL is lifting. Again, it's not always right. It's not always going to be right. It's not always what you like. But try to be objective and say, is this better for the league? Is this better in the long term? And it's still cool to disagree. I'm not saying you can't disagree with what they're doing, but just try to be objective. Anything else we need to talk about today? Because I think we're just gonna say the same things about.
We're gonna say the same things over and over again. Right. So CBS Sports Golazo again this weekend. So Kansas City,
not you,
Milwaukee, not me. No, Tom Wynn, Art Kramer, calling it from Milwaukee. We'll be back in Kansas City once again on CBS Sports Golazo for Kansas City and Dallas on Sunday the 15th. So when we next gather, Thad, we'll take a look back at the Milwaukee game, preview the Dallas game. Excited to get back on Golazo, which it's a different feel as a broadcaster let alone a spectator on Golazo in terms of how the broadcast is organized and packaged.
As a broadcaster, do you feel like you have to be just a little bit more professional than if it was just a YouTube stream?
Oh, absolutely. Stream? I mean, and to be clear and to be transparent, some of the features we've done in the past when it was purely 38 The Spot / Twitch on this date in Comets history or Kansas City indoor soccer history, we dial that back for Golazo because this is a national audience, so it's not just Comets fans. Does that mean
MASL fans?
It's not just MASL fans. Does that mean we don't cover history? Absolutely not. We talked about the history of the Ambush, their 30th anniversary. We talked about players who played both in St. Louis and Kansas City. I mean, we covered a lot of real estate, but we did it in a way that makes sense for the audience we were speaking to.
Yeah, and you mentioned 38 The Spot. That's another avenue that local Kansas Cityans have to watch 10, 12 games, whatever. I forget the exact number. So they have that opportunity to watch those games. They have that opportunity
too. So we are, when we're doing some of these broadcasts, it's a Kansas City audience on 38 The Spot. It's a U.S. audience on CBS Sports Golazo. And with Sport World and some of the things I think they have working on internationally, it's a global audience. So as an example, Sunday morning I had a Instagram message exchange with Christian Andreas' father because he wanted to know, okay, where can I watch the game? And I was able to say, okay, international broadcasters, where you go. I heard from him after the game. He got the broadcast perfectly, enjoyed the game. That's what we need to keep doing to help this game grow.
Yeah, totally agree. And if you notice it got loud, there was a very feisty scrimmage going on right below us, essentially. So
ambient background noise. That's what I call it.
You had to get a little louder there, just like you would in a game.
That's right. And sometimes at Cable Dom Arena, you have to do that because we can literally not hear ourselves. It gets so loud there, which is it's a great treat for us to be on air calling games from Cable Dom Arena.
All right, Eric, I appreciate it. Do you have any last words?
Comets fans, tune in, and we'll be back next week for a recap and always another episode of the Blue Turf.
And I'll get to make assumptions, and Eric will get to tell me it's still early in the season. Stop it.
That's right.
All right. I appreciate the time. Stick around. There might be another interview after this, and if not, it just fades out for music after a few seconds. We appreciate it. Thank you for listening, and if I poke fun at anybody, it's just for fun. We're out.